Hello, students. So I'm going to be discussing chapter 3, which is called the research process. Um, so this chapter, it criticizes researchers in a way who have a tendency to recast a research problem so that it is amenable to their favorite research method. Kind of something I alluded to the last video, chapter 2, a little bit, right? Now, if you think about it, that can be problematic. Um, and we could also discuss about how the researcher's own biases can influence their research designs. So, for example, there's two questions I really want to talk about over here today. One is explain why this practice is problematic for scientific progress. And the second part is discuss how a researcher's methodological expertise and comfort level might unconsciously bias their research design decisions and propose strategies for ensuring that the research methods are chosen to fit the problem rather than the reverse. So, for example, Dr. Bhattacharya talks about this, and he says that researchers should know the research problem before that they choose the method, because to some degree the problem in itself will determine how you solve it. Yes? So the research question then helps guide the setup of the study. Some of you down the road may be doing this exact kind of thing. You may be even doing it right now. When researchers then change the prompt to fit the method that they like, they actually will then skip the right steps, the correct ethical steps in the scientific process. Many people then, of course, pick the method before they pick the problem. So they sort of work backwards, which ethically is not a good idea. And for scientific reasoning, it's also not a good idea. You're sort of walking backwards when you should be walking forwards, actually. People then look for a problem that matches the method. When this happens, science does not stay honest. It's unethical in that sense because you've biased the study, because you sort of had a predetermined idea how you might want to solve it. So you chose the methodology in order to solve a problem that may not even have been a problem to begin with. But very often you see this, and we see this all the time. For example, Facebook is a good example about this. Actually, pretty much almost any social media, but I particularly think Facebook is pretty bad about this, where people will not look for facts, they look for opinions, and they'll use those opinions to shape their facts. But that's actually not really how the world works. You can't just assume somebody doesn't like you or said something, especially on Facebook, where there is legally no tone. There's no tone in any text messages. So how can you assume whether the person likes you or doesn't like you? Now, you could look for some circumstantial evidence, let's say. Angry emojis, a lot of big signs like exclamation marks. But someone could also just be very excited, I know I get that way sometimes, especially when I see my kids. If I were to put out emojis or exclamation points, it could mean that I could be very excited. It doesn't mean that I'm angry. Sometimes I am. But that could be a separate situation. So going back to Bhattacharya, he talks about the fact that research methods begin with how people look at things and try to make sense of them. Social systems have many parts. There are many different moving parts in the social system. And then people, of course, use different ways to answer different questions, which is the right way to do things, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all. If researchers only use surveys, experiments, or interviews, the method may miss some of the key parts of that issue. This can then lead the research question to look at what is simple to measure, so you're getting something out of it, instead of what people actually really need to know. You really haven't done any groundbreaking new research, right? Like I discussed in the last video. You kind of just have copied and pasted something that seems very safe, and you got your research grant reapproved. But that's not really how scientific advances, scientific breakthroughs happen. They happen because people take risks. They try different methodologies, different things. It's very similar to a lot of you guys. Some of you may be going through something personal right now, and you may be going through the same cycle over and over again. You have to break out of that cycle. And if other things you've tried before haven't worked, like they say, how's that working out for you? Then maybe you need to find a different way to do something, possibly something new. The chapter starts to explain, of course, that research is really actually a process. It's not an end-all or be-all game. It's a process. Research begins when people watch and notice things, for example. People then use thinking and logic. People test ideas to see if the ideas work. Bhattacharya also explains research like this. For example, when a researcher likes a method and changes the prompt to fit that method, the rationalization stage often does not develop. The researcher does not look for the best reason for the phenomena, right? The researcher then looks for a reason that the researcher can test what the tools of research has. Even if the study uses the right methods, the study may not give us much theory or help us understand more, basically. It's not very helpful that way. So when you're doing research and you're a researcher, I know, for example, a simple thing I know, Dr. Mark Holzer, who was the dean of the school of public affairs at Rutgers, he had a very good example, a very good technique he would do for research. And bear in mind, this is in the year 2005, when the iPhone hadn't come out until 2007. So things were still in the desktop phase and online. And I remember one day we were having a conversation in class, we're talking about different research methods. And he said that then the way he did research, I mean, it was pretty much anything, and students can do the same thing too, is he would open up he would open up a browser. I think at that time it might have been Safari, or maybe Mozilla was around at that time. I don't think Google Chrome was out at that time, but I could be wrong. And he would just simply open up 5 or 6 tabs in the same browser window on his desktop. And each of the tabs would have a different search engine. So he'd have Google, he'd have Yahoo, he'd have Ask Jeeves, which I don't know, I think it still exists, but there was a few ones called Excite. I don't know if people have heard of these. They're like much older, of course. AOL, that's much older. But he'd have 5 or 6 of these different search engines on there, and he would put the exact same keywords into the search engines. And he, of course, would find different answers for whatever search terms he was looking at. And then he'd have to go through it. That's what researchers often do. We go through a lot of different data, and we squeeze out all the data to get DRIP, data rich but information poor. And we finally can sift through that pile of junk, whatever it is, to find the real gems somewhere in there, in that pile. And then you build on that. That's generally how research is done. It's very painful, it's very slow, it's very tiresome. And if you're not someone who's patient with things, don't become a researcher. This is not the type of stuff you should be doing. Science, of course, improves over time when theory, research questions, and methods all match. People can ask questions. Researchers ask questions all the time in different ways. But those ways do not choose the questions before people start to ask. When researchers then choose a method they prefer, their study may technically be precise and within the certain boundaries of what research is. But the broader idea or the deeper insight behind the research can then become limited because you can't really extrapolate it and generalize it across other disciplines or other research. So that's why it's always the wisest thing in the world to really think through, plan ahead, put down on pen and paper or pencil and paper what you are really trying to accomplish with the research question you're putting out there. Because based on that, you will get certain data coming back to you. So that concludes Chapter 3, my discussion board question for the week. And I look forward to talking to you guys at the next video.